So I've called this Tears and Tantrums, a Clinician's Guide, and I want to talk to you mostly about emotion. And you would think, given how important the topic in people's lives and in their experience emotion is, that clinical psychologists would have a lot of training in this and a lot of knowledge of this, and it turns out they have almost no training and almost no knowledge of theories of emotion, or any idea of how emotion works, how people's emotions work, what to do. What to do in terms of other people's emotions. And I recently spoke to a group of nurse practitioners. I thought, well, maybe they have more training in this. And they said, no, we thank you for presenting this. It's the first time anybody has talked to us about emotion. So the state of affairs is very upsetting in terms of whether anybody is paying any attention to theories of and ways of handling and dealing with emotion. There are even entire books about therapies that are supposed to be emotionally focused, like Sue Johnson's work, in which you can go through the entire book and find no definition of emotion. It's simply, there's books, a couple of those books simply assume you know what it means and that that's all they need to say about it. And I don't think that's all you need to say about it. So because our knowledge in this area tends to be primitive, we can't answer questions about why it is people cry both at happy events and sad events. We don't know why tension seems to be relieved after having a tantrum. We don't know why it is that we shake in connection with fear. Those are just a few of the questions that most people, including clinicians, are unable to answer. So this is going to set some of that straight. And one of the people in my experience first people in my experience to be concerned about all of this was George Kelly, who very well understood the difficulties of our mind-body dualism. And you know, Kelly ran into this problem because many people accused his theory of being cognitive, and they said he didn't pay attention to emotion. And Kelly himself denied this, and what he said in return was that those distinctions that we make between cognition and emotion and behavior are artificial and, as he puts it, confuse everything and clarify nothing. So I've come to call that Aristotle's curse, this division into the classical Aristotelian categories of emotion, behavior, actions, feelings, and thoughts. So I'm going to talk some about Aristotle's curse, and I also want to talk some about the steam kettle approach to emotion, which is where much of the culture is, and actually, unfortunately, where many clinicians still are. Does that term mean anything to you, the steam kettle theory? This is the notion that emotion is something that boils up inside you, collects inside you, and that if it's not released, it can cause troubles. It roams around and causes troubles. And it's from the steam kettle thinking that we have expressions like blowing off steam, being flooded with emotion, boiling over with rage, keeping a lid on our emotions. The notion is if you keep them down inside, that's not going to work out well. Feeling drained after a good cry. And the problem, according to steam kettle theory, is keeping your emotions either bottled up too long, or releasing them abruptly, or having them come out in odd forms. The steam kettle theory has its origins in the olden times when skulls were trephined to release evil spirits. You know, they drilled holes in the skull to let the evil spirits out. Well, the steam kettle approach has a family resemblance to that. Everything is inside, and you have to open up the thing and let it out. Also, the purgatives they used to give people to rid the body of toxins. Again, the idea that there's bad stuff inside and it has to get out. And also leeches being applied to purify the bloodstream. The leeches, again, sucking out the bad stuff. Before I go further, I want to show you a brief film clip. I'm just going to show this to you. I ask you when you watch it, it's about 7 or 8 minutes long. It's from the film The Miracle Worker, the original version of that film with Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke. And it's a scene towards the end of the film. And I'll be discussing it later. I might even play it for you a second time toward the end of this talk. But what I want you to do is just notice your reactions to it. Okay? And as you may or may not know, The Miracle Worker is the story of Helen Keller, who was born deaf and blind. And this is about her teacher, Anne Sullivan, whose job was to try to teach language to Helen Keller.
Occasionally, another hand can smooth things out. There. Now, shall we start over? Give us time, Lord.
Don't get up. Don't smooth anything else out for me. Don't you see it anyway? I treat her like a thief, trying to do what else than a thief. I expect her to see. Don't undo what I do. I'll make her do this picture again. You let her speak to you like that, Arthur? A creature who works for you?
No, I don't. I said let her go. She's right. She's right. Kate's right. I'm right and you're wrong. Has it never occurred to you that on one occasion you might be consummately wrong?
All right. No, she's not here. Oh. W-A-T-E-R, it has a name. W-A-T.
guess I should give you a minute to talk about reactions before we go ahead.
I cried
You cried.
multiple times. I knew what was going to happen. In some ways, cried before things happened. So,
Any other thoughts or reactions? Anguish at the beginning? Yeah. So why the crying? It's a victorious event. She's finally understood the meaning of a word, water, in other words. Why? Yeah.
I don't know theoretically why the cry, but I mean, for me, I feel like, well, I'm a crier in general, but really cry at events that feel poignant. Like there's something that just, I don't know, touches my heart in a way that leads me to well up and cry.
Right.
I think for me it was more a sense of being overwhelmed because she can now experience the beauty of what's around her rather than just kind of be in herself.
Yep.
She can actually explore.
Isn't it because it's an altered state or a change in what occurred? So within change, both positive and negative change, humans react to change. And so because of that, and her situation changed because she recognized a word, it can draw emotion.
Yeah. So you're very close to what I'm going to say about it. So I'm going to go on from there because I'm going to be more specific about it, but I'm not going to contradict what you just said. So I'm going to now back up because I now want to deal with the whole issue of emotion, and then we'll be getting back to the specifics of miracle worker and some other such reactions. So by the way, Kelly understood that part of the confusion is once you break out the system into separate feelings, thoughts, and actions, you get into these conundrums as to which comes first. So there were theorists who then said, well, if the feeling causes the thought, and you had other theorists saying that the thought causes the feeling. And then you had another group that said that if you act, then your feelings and your thoughts will come secondary and support the action, etc. And then we've gone back and forth. And what Kelly understood is none of those questions were answerable because they all assume that something that's a unitary process is somehow divided up. It is divided up in language, but it's not divided up as far as the system is concerned. So I want to begin with a more precise definition of emotion than maybe the ones that you're used to. I'm going to, what I call emotion are the body postures. I'm going to repeat this twice because it's a little complicated. It's technical. The body postures and hormonal settings that form the necessary support system for classes of action. I'll say it again. Emotions are the body postures and hormonal settings that form the necessary support system for classes of action. So, for example, fighting is a class of action. It requires that the body be set in a certain way, that there be certain hormones flowing at a certain rate, and that the skeletal structure be arranged in a certain way. And if you don't have that support system, it becomes very hard to do fighting. So, for example, if your body is set for sleeping, which is another class of actions, you can't do sleeping and fighting at the same time because they call for practically opposite emotional settings. So I need to add that emotions are all the time. That is, it's not that you are sometimes emotional and the rest of the time not. I know we've become accustomed to thinking of emotions as only the dramatic, catastrophic, noteworthy, big changing circumstances. But according to this definition, there are always body settings and hormonal settings. So every class of action has an emotional, that is a bodily accompaniment that makes it either more probable or less probable. So this is not just a matter of great passion or overwhelming hopelessness or abject terror or all-consuming anger. Emotion is all the time. It includes cooking dinner, reading a novel, taking out the trash, solving a math problem. That is why biologist Maturana says understanding is an emotion. What he means by that is if we're doing this and trying to understand each other, we have to be bodily set in a particular way that supports this kind of activity. If we were more aroused, then we can't be focusing on these thoughts. If we were less aroused, we'd all drop off to sleep. So it's a very specific set of emotional coordinates. But just because it's not dramatic doesn't mean it's not emotional. So thoughts are all the time. That is, the system is always engaged in cognitive activity. It's always engaged, it always has settings. And we're always in action. I mean, we never stop being in action. Being asleep is in action. Fighting is in action. Solving a math problem is action. So I'm trying to get rid of this notion of dividing into that classical 1, 2, 3. Now, we then also have, Maturana says, what have been called emotional contradictions. And in fact, a lot of what you call emotions, or up to now have called emotions, are actually emotional contradictions. An emotional contradiction is when your body is set for one class of action, but the situation calls them for another class of action. So there's a mismatch between the settings and the action that you want to perform. So you've had a fight at work, let's say, not necessarily a physical fight, and you're home, you're coming home, and the door opens and your wife is standing there and she says, "Give me a kiss." You're still fighting. And affiliating and disaffiliating are opposites, and you cannot affiliate and give a kiss. At the same time, you're thinking of all the things you should have told the person who you were in the fight with. You're still in fight mode. So you experience an emotional contradiction. And what you generally do is you say, "Not now." Or you may pretend to kiss the person, you may go through, give it, what's the word, lip, what is it?
Lip service.
Lip service, yes, that's what I'm saying. Literally and figuratively give it.
Yeah.
But it's not right. Similarly, so you feel when you're in an emotional contradiction, you're being pulled in two directions at once. Now, if this happens once in a while, not a big problem. If it happens a lot, then you go to see a therapist. Because you will experience this pull, and it will be unpleasant. Now, tears, laughter, trembling, having a tantrum, and yawning. And yes, yawning is included, although we don't quite understand yet why. By the way, the research in this field is also dismally missing. There is some research, but it's not what you would think it would be given, again, the central status of emotion in our lifetimes. So I'll paraphrase the family therapist Carol Anderson, who said, "We started with nothing and we still have a lot of it left." So those experiences, tears, laughter, trembling, having a tantrum, and yawning, are technically not emotions. This is startling, isn't it?
Huh.
What they are is outward manifestations of abrupt or large shifts in body chemistry. Tears are an outward manifestation, and so here I'm coming back to what you said, of a change. And but the changes are very specific, and they're normally from sympathetic system arousal, tension, activation, and the switch into parasympathetic system recovery. To have tears, you must first have arousal and then recovery. And there's always a point, and I say we can always psychologically identify it, of the event that permits the system to make that shift from going up to coming back down. From high tension to recalibration. By the way, nothing is literally released. Emotions, first of all, are not stored. Obviously, if they're settings, they can't be stored. They're just settings. And you can have contradictions, that is, the setting doesn't fit your activity, but nothing is stored. Hormones may be stored temporarily. There may be hormones in the bloodstream. It may take a while for them to get titrated out when they're no longer necessary. But there's no storage in this, and there's no release. Therefore, the steam kettle approach is totally wrong. Now, there are reasons we believe in it. There's reasons why the culture likes to think in steam kettle terms, and I'm going to get to that. But biologically speaking, it's nonsense. Yes, sir.
Actually, there's reports now, studies, research on pregnant women who go through traumatic experiences and their connection with the fetus and their hormonal levels and what the hormones with the exchange, how it can affect the fetus, which I thought was really interesting when you were mentioning this.
Yeah.
This is a pretty new study right now. So
yes, and a lot of this work is pretty new.
Yeah.
So, tears are neutral. That is, they're neither sad nor happy. They're an outward manifestation of a rapid or abrupt shift in body chemistry from sympathetic functioning to parasympathetic functioning. In the film clip, and by the way, I've said that's true of tears. I'm going to show you it's also true of laughter, also true of tantrums, also true of all the... In the film clip, and the reason these film clips are useful, we've studied Miracle Worker, we've studied The King and I, we've studied the curious case of Benjamin Button, a number, because the author, the playwrights have done a good job, and the script writers have done a good job. And since it's hard for people just to introspect while they're having their own personal tears, for research purposes, it's useful to be able to show a film clip and say, when did this happen? When did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did the other thing? So in this film clip, what first happens is you are aroused. So it starts with a fight. And everybody is at loggerheads. Everybody's angry at everybody else. Helen is angry with her teacher and is throwing water. The parents are unhappy with how she's wants to handle the situation. They want to protect their child. The teacher says if you protect her, she won't learn anything. The relative is everybody is all over the place. There are no tears at that point. There is arousal. Where do the tears come? The tears come as soon as there appears to be a resolution to the conflict. Because it's now clear she gets it. Helen gets it. and everything is going to be okay. That permits your system to go off duty, switch to parasympathetic, and you go, and if it's strong enough and abrupt enough, you don't just go, you go, if I can do my poor imitation. And we talk about a good cry. It's not the cry that's good. It's the parasympathetic recovery that's good. It's the letting go that's good. It's the marshaling of our resources if the problem hasn't been completely solved for another attack on the problem. In other words, for the moment, I give it up. You take care of me. And then I can rejuvenate, recalibrate, and be ready, re-energize, and be ready for another. Wait till tomorrow morning. We'll tackle it because I can't handle this now. So there was a woman who, and this is a very common experience, she had been in an auto accident. She was not hurt. And she then became very industrious and helped everybody who was involved in the accident, made sure people were all right, and made sure the police had been called and so on. And then the ambulance arrived, and she went over and she sat on the curb and started to cry. And she started to cry because now she can go off duty. The moment she signals, okay, somebody else is in charge, I can go off duty, then parasympathetic takes over, and we get the reduction. A kid is lost in a supermarket. When does the kid cry? I shouldn't leave this open to yeah.
When he finds his parents?
When he sees his or her parents, yes. What do you have first? You have attention. You have heightened attention, and which means tension. You know, if you take out the ATT, it's attention and attention. But then the parent's face, the mother's face, let's say, comes around the corner of the string beans, and you get tears. What do mothers do in that situation? Unfortunately, they say, "Why are you crying? I'm here." The kid is doing it correctly. That is, their system knows how to do this. It's the parent that doesn't understand that you don't cry when the things are in progress. You cry when there's a moment of release. The mother is the mother of the bride is making sure everybody is in the right place, and then the bride walks down the aisle and everything is beautiful and it's going on schedule and nothing has gone wrong and nobody is tripped, and tears flow, and people say, "Why are you sad?" She's not sad. She is able to shift to go off duty into parasympathetic response. We will call the tears sad tears if the context is sad. We'll call them happy tears or joyous tears if the context is joyous, as like a wedding. By the way, these psychoanalysts have wrongly gone to town on this, saying the mother is crying because she's sad, and they have all sorts of fancy interpretations about the loss involved and so on. Yes, her primary job, let's say, as a mother, has reached a milestone, but the rest of this interpretation is not correct, and it's not needed. It's superfluous to the mechanics of it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Let me answer one or two of your questions before you ask them, and then if that's not the question,
Okay.
because people say, well, what if the kid cries before they see their mother in the supermarket? It is true. Some kids will cry without seeing their actual parent, sometimes making contact with another human being, maybe the store manager or just another customer, because that's enough safety. In other words, there's enough, that child is mature enough to know that person is now going to help me, I'm not alone in this, and they can give a piece of the problem over to that person. They rarely cry just looking at the spinach can. Very young children and infants do cry simply because they give up on the problem at hand. In other words, they're trying to put the block in the thing and it won't go, and it won't go, and it won't go, and they fall back and tears flow, and that's the signal for the caretaker, often a parent or an adult, to come in and simplify and say the block goes here and show them the hole that the block's supposed to go in. That mechanism, which is necessary for our survival, that parent-child caretaking mechanism, for which tears as an outward manifestation of our state of being is a very useful instrument, because it signals what we have to do, actually gets in our way in working with adults. So I'll come to that in 1 second. First, I want to see if I've answered it, or you have a different question.
Maybe. But I'm wondering about, some people are, I don't know how to describe it, like it's leaky, right? So that,
yes.
That is, they're continuing through action, but they're teared up, they're tears are streaming down, but, they realize, this person has just treated them badly, they're throwing stuff in a bag, and they're storming out the door, and tears are coming down, but they're clearly still in
yes.
a mode where they're being active and they're not in recovery.
Yeah, and I was interested in the talk on DBT this morning, because we do get cycling for a couple of reasons, where the person is rapidly in and out of tears.
Right.
Where the tension level decreases and then increases and then decreases and then increases. Particularly with people who feel they shouldn't have cried and they feel guilty about tears, who then chastise themselves for crying, and who try to stop the tears. When you try to stop the tears, you increase the tension. You say, oh, never mind, I'm sorry. And the tension is now going up. And now they can cry, now they're going to, if they let go of that, then they'll cry again. So you get these more complicated pictures. But I think the basic mechanism is basically the same for everyone. Also, though, you have different genetically determined levels of lability of the hormonal system. So not everybody is a crier, and not everybody is, there are different levels of that. Okay, so, by the way, we rarely cry. Tears are most easily triggered by a friendly gesture, a sympathetic voice, a familiar face, and other signs of safety. Again, you're allowed to go off duty. That's why people describe it as letting go or giving up. By the way, some people say, I have broken down. I don't think of tears as breaking down. I think of it as really signifying a breakthrough of some sort, because the system has reorganized itself. And I'm going to illustrate that with regard to laughter, because it's clearer there, but in tears the same applies, that there's got to be some system reorganization, which means, by the way, it has to be cognitive in a sense. There has to be a shift. So when my father died, I was away, we lived in New York, and I was away, however, on a trip in New Jersey when I got the news. And I had to take several buses and a subway to get home. And during that entire time, not a single tear. I go to the door, my mother opens the door. She just looked a particular way. And in that look, the sense, if I had to put it into words, the sense I had is, we will be all right. Your father has died. He had 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 a previous heart attack and had now had a second heart attack. So the death wasn't a complete surprise. But what she was signaling is, the family will make it, we will be all right. And I collapsed in tears. The trip, I'm holding on. I'm not letting go. Now I'm in home territory, and I can let go. By the way, one of the reasons men traditionally have not cried as copiously and on as many occasions as women is because the men were the warriors, and you do not cry when the enemy is present. You cry when there's a friendly face, when there's a reprieve, when something has shifted. While you're out there fighting, you just keep fighting. So what do you do? And I'm addressing this to the males, particularly. If you're in the movies, you're watching a film, and it's toward the end of the film, and you're crying, and you're with your date, maybe, and you decide it's not a good idea to be seen this way, and the lights in the theater are about to come up. Juan, do you know?
It happened to me.
Do you know what you do to make it, to not be seen crying?
You just like hide your face or just go to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah, so you abscond from the scene. But what if you're on the verge and you want to not cry, you hold your face tight and you hold your body tight. In other words, you're artificially keeping the sympathetic system going rather than allowing the release into the parasympathetic system. And you furiously think about something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at the same time both a cognitive and a bodily, if we were splitting those operations, it's all together.
Right, and then therapists get it, because the way they talk about it is you stayed in your head.
You stay in your head, yes.
You stayed in your head, and you didn't allow your feelings out.
Yes, and you talk.
You intellectualize.
Yes, we say you intellectualize. Yeah. As if when you're crying it's not an intellectual exercise, and it's completely an intellectual exercise as much as it is a bodily settings exercise.
Right.
Now I want to switch for a minute to I want to give one more example of how the childhood mechanism gets in our way. I had a friend whose wife had an operation, and he was in the intensive care waiting room. You know, it's not the intensive care, the surgery waiting room, pacing. And then he saw the surgeon come out of the operating room and called to him to come out in the hall. And of course, since the surgeon was not smiling, he feared the worst. So he goes out in the hall, and the surgeon said, the surgery went terrifically. She's out of the anesthesia and everything is fine. And my friend collapsed in tears and literally sort of sank to the floor. And the poor surgeon starts to like, oh, listen, I'm sorry. So these are situations where everything is okay, but because we're used to taking care of kids where that means so we have to help somehow, we want to rush in and help. But there's nothing to be done. And so we make a lot of clinical mistakes. I'm going to enumerate those in a minute. In our desire to be actively helpful when no active help is needed. But let me take a minute to switch to laughter, because I want to show you that the same mechanism that I've described for tears is at work. In fact, one of the mysteries is how laughter and tears are different, because in many ways they're quite similar. And to do this, I'm going to tell you the joke of Fat Ethel. And it's a terrible joke, but it's great for illustrating this point. Fat Ethel goes into a restaurant and she orders a blueberry pie, a whole blueberry pie. And the waitress says, okay, should I cut it into 6 pieces or 8? And Fat Ethel thinks about it for a moment. She says, "You better make it 6. I'm on a diet." Now, what is happening here? First of all jokes. They used to say jokes were due to incongruity, and that's true in a sense, but it's not the whole story. They're due to something that is a puzzle, and therefore an incongruity, but it has to be an incongruity that's resolved. So what happens in your head is, first of all, you're tense because as soon as I tell you I'm going to tell you a joke, you're on duty. You have to. I'm about to give you a puzzle that you have to solve. Otherwise, you won't get the joke. Mm-hmm. And now we're okay with logic up until 6 or 8 pieces. Okay, 6, okay. But then when I give you the punchline, which is I'm on a diet, there's a disconnect. Because we know that 6 pieces of papaya and 8 pieces of papaya are the same pieces of that
amount of pie.
But we know that Fat Ethel, we suddenly realize Fat Ethel has confused numerosity with quantity. Didn't you say to yourself, oh, Fat Ethel was confused with numerosity with quantity? Which we then understand immediately because that's a childlike logic that we have grown out of but understand. If we didn't understand it, it would not be funny. We have to make a new sense out of this. We have to abandon the old sense and make a new sense. And that's again why I'm endorsing your notion that it involves a reorganization or a change in the system, even if it's a trivial one in this instance. People used to tell non-jokes as if they were jokes, as victim practical pranks. So they tell something that had no resolution. One of the famous ones, I'm going to foreshorten it, just give you the outline of it. 3 bears go down a hill, each one when they go down, they say, "Wee!" But the last bear, when he goes down the hill, says, "No soap radio!" And then the people who are in on this laugh, or pretend to laugh. And the victim is thinking, "No soap radio? What's that got to do?" It's incongruous. But there's no way to make new sense out of it, no way to resolve the incongruity. And then the pranksters say, "Get it? No soap radio, get it?" And then what often happens is the person pretends to laugh because there's an embarrassing social situation. And then the others turn on them and say, "What's so funny? Explain, why are you laughing?" So that illustrates the validity of this that non-instance indicates the validity of this theory of both laughter and tears.
I had a friend who used to always tell the joke. He used to say, "What's the difference between a duck?" That was the whole thing. That was the whole thing. You're like, I don't even understand what you just asked me. You know, what, huh? He thought that was so, and then you'd watch him be confused and he would laugh and laugh and laugh.
So I'm now about to shift into what to do and not to do as clinicians with regard to tantrums, laughter, and all these things. And before I do that, let me stop to see if we're in agreement so far, and if you have any questions about what I've said so far. Yes.
So I had a question about empathy.
Yeah.
And I've already said I'm crier. I cry a lot. So I was trying to think about, do I actually feel that tension between the arousal and the resolution? And so when you were telling the story about taking the bus and then going home and seeing your mother's face, I teared up. Mm-hmm. And trying to figure out, okay, well, did I actually feel aroused? So, I mean, I guess, is there just sort of this empathy that I can understand or imagine the experience that you were going through? Because I don't know that I was, I mean, I don't know what's happening in me. I'm just trying to think, I don't know that I was actually aroused, but certainly could imagine what that was like for you to be on the bus and then go home. And I was like, oh, you're going to hit the door, and I know that's when you're going to cry. And,
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. So I guess I wonder kind of what happens when it's less about what's happening for the individual and more
No,
about...
it's not.
Or is it always what's happening for...
To imagine is to live through. Now, you may not live it at the intensity or in the situation that I did when it was my father, but you have just gone through greeting my mother at the door.
So sometimes I've known clients who actually have an easier time getting emotional about a movie
Definitely.
than in their own life,
Yes.
right? Because it's that I thought maybe you can.
Yes, so Bambi is a big one.
Right.
And people who find it very difficult, who claim they didn't cry when they lost a relative or a parent or a spouse, cried their eyes out when Bambi, discovered by his mother, is reunited with Bambi's mother. And it's first of all because of the wonderful scripting, but secondly also because of the safety factor. If a situation is too dangerous and you're also still worried about how will our family, who's going to work and how will we, it's not safe enough, you can't let go. But if it's just made the optimal distance from you, enough so that it's arousing,
Yes.
but not so much that you can't let go of it.
So is a client who we will often label them as sort of intellectualized or unemotional, are those folks who are having a hard time feeling safe enough to let down?
They may well be. One of the things I learned early on is with male clients, and by the way, every year that goes by, this is less of a problem.
Right.
But I'm old, so because a male client would come in and cry in the first session and not return for therapy,
Right.
because they lost face and were too embarrassed to come back. So I then regularly would say, if a person cries, particularly early on, I would say, this is what we do here. This is expected. This is good for the team. And I've tried to normalize it and reflect their feelings. So you may go home and you're going to wonder how, in front of a practical stranger, you just, and that's what everybody says. And I want them to know they're in good company and that they will come back. All right. I'm going to talk more about clinical things. First rule of thumb is do not crowd a person. And I'm going to first do tears and then I'll round it out to some of the other reactions. Do not crowd a person who's crying. If you've cried recently, you know that you want a little space. You don't want everybody hovering over you. And yet, I'm going to use John as my model because I know him well. He was like, oh, what's wrong, yeah. And you can't,
Yeah.
you need,
Don't touch me.
don't
touch me.
Bubble.
If you happen to be close by and you want to just put a finger on a person just to let them know you're present, okay, but any more than that, not a good idea. This is also a terrible time to be asking questions. What are you crying about?
No.
Not at all good. There'll be plenty of time for debriefing later, if in fact any debriefing is necessary. No need to move to stop the tears. By the way, some people think if you stop the tears, you've stopped the problem. This is like trying to fix a car by getting the check engine light to not go on. Tears are always good for the team. Why are they good for the team? Because for some reason or other, the system is in recovery. It's biologically recovering. It's regaining resources. It's perfect. And people have said to me, well, what if the person goes on crying forever? Well, nobody goes on crying forever. No, nobody dies of crying. And believe you'll be happy to know that.
Makes me very happy.
But our sense of time, we get so uncomfortable as adults about how to handle other adults who are crying, that even though just a minute has passed, we think, my God, this is going on and on and on. So we miscalculate the time involved. And my clinical rule of thumb is, if the tears are flowing, I do distinguish between real crying, which means there's some wetness or tears, as opposed to pretend crying or complaining with a crying tone, or whining, like, I don't think you should do. That's whining, that's not crying. But if it's crying, something good, there's reorganization taking place, leave it alone. It's working. And in fact, be happy that the client, if it's a client, or a friend if it's a friend, feels safe enough with you to allow that parasympathetic response to occur. Avoid the temptation to delegitimize or minimize the person's situation, as in, there's no need to cry about it.
Oh, yeah.
If they're crying, the system is doing its job. False reassurances are to our detriment. Like, everything is going to be fine. Yeah? Maybe, maybe not. It is not necessary. The person is crying. Great. Verbal interchange is the enemy. The less of that, the better. If the person starts to explain or apologize, I wave them off. They say, well, you're saying, later, just let it be, let it go. When the episode winds down, I sometimes, if I feel I want to know more, I sometimes say, what is, and listen carefully to the locution, what is the thought that helped you cry? I virtually never say to clients, how do you feel? First of all, too often if you say, how do you feel? They say, well, I don't know, my stomach is a little upset, but it's not that. But if you say, what's the thought that helped you cry? They'll say, I realize I never had a chance to say goodbye to my father. And we had been on that canoe trip, and I wished I had told him that I loved him, and I didn't, and now it's too late. And then you'll get more tears. Again, meaning thoughts and feelings are not different things. And notice that I said, helped you cry. I don't say made you cry. Because I want it to be positively connoted. It's a good thing. So what's the thought that helped you cry? I don't ever talk about getting your feelings out or all those steam kettle stuff. Now, when clients laugh, by the way, my rule is, and I'm saying this for you particularly, Emily, it's okay for the therapist to cry as long as you don't cry more than the client. I feel it's bad to upstage the client. So you cry along, but try not to cry more than they do. And similarly, it's all right to laugh, but not necessarily laugh more than they do. And I've heard therapists who ought to know better say, why are you laughing? Don't you see this as a serious matter? Well, the reason they're laughing is because it's a serious matter, and therefore the system is activated, and then there's a release of the activation, which is when the laughter occurs, which means everything is going hunky-dory. Is that still a good expression, hunky-dory?
Yep.
of my day. So most of what the admonitions for me are to do is to do less and to let the natural process take place, to not interrupt the natural process. Tantrums are the natural way in which we release aggression and so you can think of these things. There are I forget the guy's name. Maybe I'll think of it. Maybe I won't. What he called blocked actions. So anger is a blocked action. In other words, I'd like to kill you, but I can't because I'll go to jail, or you might be bigger and you might retaliate, and so on. So I'm blocked from killing you. So it's killing, but blocked. The tantrum means it's unblocked more, and the system, and there's system recovery involved. Similarly, shaking in fear. So in a horror movie, the door flies open, but it's not the monster, it's a sympathetic character. And there's a shiver that runs through the audience. It's the shaking off of fear. And by the way, the reason yawning is included in this group of outward manifestations of biological shifts is because it seems to, like these other things, be social. In other words, people cry more easily when others are crying. They laugh more easily when others are laughing, which is why we used to have laugh tracks before shows started being filmed before live audiences. So that if you were watching it alone on your TV, you would hear other people laughing. Because if you don't hear other people laughing, it doesn't feel funny. So all these things have a social contagion element, and so does yawning. If I were to yawn now, some of you would be at least stifling that with a bit of an urge to yawn. So I would say the mechanism we still have no idea what the actual evolutionary function of yawning is, if there is one. That's still not clear. But it does fit the social contagion rules. And sometimes people who are shifting in their biology do yawn as part of that shift. All right. How are we doing on time? Not bad. We have till 3? Or 15? Is it 15 in this system? All right, so let me mention some miscellaneous things that I want to be sure to get in. First of all, there are non-emotional tears. That is, tears that don't have anything to do with anything I've just said, but are simply to get dirt out of your eye, to keep your eye, what do you call the outer layer? I forgot. The retina. Is it the retina? No. Cornea. Lubricated, and so on. And we share that feature with mammals. Some of the current research suggests that the tears that are that we would call emotional tears have a different chemical composition than the lubricating tears. And some others have disagreed with that, so we're not sure. As far as we know it, no non-humans cry emotionally the way we do, even though it's been suggested a couple of times. Distressed elephants and some other animals may wail or emit mournful sounding cries, but not accompanied by moistness. Chimpanzees, elephants, and apes appear to mourn the death of a group member, but not with tears. Now I want to go over briefly The rules for handling, the first aid rules for handling a person who is angry or having a tantrum. And the person who's having the tantrum has his or her job to do, and the clinician or friend or spouse has his or her job to do, and their jobs are slightly different. The person who's having the tantrum, well, let me start with the person who's observing the tantrum. Your job is to A, reflect and indicate an understanding of to reflect the feelings of the person having the tantrum and indicating beyond expectation your understanding of the circumstances that would lead them to have the experience that they're having. So you say, I can see that you're very upset about this. This is absolutely impossible. You don't know how this could possibly happen to a person and why it keeps happening to you. Whatever you can say, and when I do this as a clinician, I watch the person very carefully, because if they're not nodding, then I know I'm not yet on the right track. So I have to connect up. If I connect up, it works like magic. I create safety by indicating recognition beyond expectation of the person's experience. Then, if necessary, we go to step 2, which is mostly necessary with kids, which is to set the limits, so the person doesn't harm themselves or someone else. So, sisters are not for hitting, would be setting the limit. I can see you're very upset. Sisters are not for hitting. If necessary, with a kid, you may have to restrain them so they don't break a bone or destroy the furniture or whatever. And then you very quickly suggest, as step 3, a socially acceptable alternative. Again, more relevant when it's a kid than an adult. So you say, I can see you're very angry at your sister. Sisters are not for hitting. Show me on this piece of paper what you'd like to do to her. And Chaim Ganat, who originated that sort of step system of 3, says if you're the clinician and your child client is about to throw a block at you, you're allowed to reverse steps 2 and 1. So you're allowed to say, therapists are not for hitting. I see you're very angry. Because it says otherwise, it'll be too late and the block will be headed in your direction. These steps, for the most part, work just as well with adults as they do with kids. Because adults too have tantrums, and adults too have all these reactions. And we actually make more mistakes. We do better sometimes with kids than with adults, because we don't know what to do with the adult. So the observers, what I didn't tell you is what the person having the tantrum should do, if they can. And Emily, you should see if this coincides with DBT or not.
Okay.
What you do is you express your feeling, and you're allowed to express it as comfortably and as vigorously as you want. And you accept it, and you express it. Step 2 is you describe the situation. And step 3 is you say what you would like to have happen. So again, to take an easy example. This is infuriating. Milk has been spilled. It has to be cleaned up. So I expressed my feeling, I stated the situation, and I said what needs to have happen, what I need to have happen. What you don't do, either in the role of the tantrumer or the observer, is to engage in recrimination, characterization, or accusation. I don't say, you clumsy oaf, can't you watch where you're going? I don't say that's, you're going to grow up just like your father, who know nothing, who didn't care about any, none of that. This is upsetting. Remember I said I was director of the program at Temple at the time, and about the third person came in with a problem, and I was already upset about the first two. And I remember saying, this is very upsetting. And if I were you, I wouldn't describe this right now. I would come back this afternoon, because I'm in no mood to give you any kind of a useful answer. So you are reading out what's going on with you. You're telling people how to be with you. You're giving them appropriate warnings and suggesting an alternative. Come back this afternoon. One other point I'll address, and then I'll leave things open for examples and questions. Catharsis. Catharsis comes from is a variant of the steam kettle theory. So it is not true, but these things look like they're true because sometimes when you beat on a pillow, you do feel better. And it looks like you got something out, even though nothing got out. And you feel better because they've encouraged you to imagine the pillow being your boss, and whereas your boss put you down, you're now getting even by punching the boss out in this at least hypothetical way. And now so you have retaliation, and your system likes that better than demoralization. There was a very clever social psychology experiment done where people were in separate rooms and there were stooges involved, but they thought they were talking to other subjects in other rooms. Okay? Hard to do these anymore with consent committees being as they are these days. And the other people insulted this subject, but then they could either reply back or have someone reply back on their behalf. And both had the biological system recover to the same degree and the person feel equally well. So whether they pounded the pillow or someone pounded the pillow for them made no difference, as long as their social status, which they had lost, had been regained. They felt they had been avenged or that their face had been saved. So these are social operations. So you don't need to, years ago I ran into a graduate student at Temple, and he was holding a tennis racket. And I said, gee, I didn't know we had tennis courts. He said, oh, I'm not playing tennis. I said, but you have a racket. He says, yeah, I'm going to a group where they were going to pound things with the tennis racket. All right, I will now, I think I've said what needs to be said about the basics, so what issues, questions, comments?
Sometimes you're saying don't crowd people when they're crying.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people are crying, they seek you out, right? They want to hug you or be comforted. So I assume that that's a different scenario, if they're requesting that or soliciting that.
Yes, if that means safety to them, fine.
Right? Because I've known people, they get upset, they cry, and they hug you.
Yeah. Again, but you have to take your cue from them. More often, if it's done out of our discomfort and anxiety, it's bad. Okay. If it's in compliance with with the more infant-like holding and okay. But that's anathema to many adults.
Right.
They don't want that.
Just interested to go, there's a, and all what you said resonates, but there's an evidence-based side of any form of measured physiological responses that support the conversation.
Yes.
And that can be done.
Yeah, if you send me an email, I'll send you a reference list which has the, including I discovered we did a study a long time ago based on the miracle worker in the 70s, and I just bought one of the latest books on research on crying because I figured I better see if anything new has come out since I last looked, and it cites our paper in almost every chapter, so I was very both pleased and displeased. Pleased to see my name being cited so much, and displeased that so little has happened since.
That must be a good book. That must be a good book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to thank you. It provided me a lot of insight about a situation where you're with someone and you see the crying happen. Because it can be very tempting, at least from my perspective, when someone's crying, that my tension's going to go up. Because it's like, here's a problem that needs to be solved, when what you're suggesting is, well, maybe actually the problem is in the process of being solved.
And at least some little aspect of it has already been solved.
Yeah.
A new point of view, again, maybe minuscule, sometimes a very major shift in point of view, but something has shifted. That's what the tears will not appear. Yeah.
I'm still kind of on the whole biological and hormone thing and reaction of emotion. And this is just something that I came into. I was at a maker fair in Ottawa, actually, and there was this artist, and he had little vials of female tears.
Female tears?
Different kinds, whether angry tears, sad tears, happy tears. And apparently, smelling them affects the hormones of males. Although I'm not sure, like, I know there's a lot of studies right now online that are doing this about the effects of tears to the person who's exposed to the tears, not necessarily the person that's creating. But I thought maybe I was wondering if you.
Yeah, there's some. I don't think it's proven yet, but there is some research that says that. That males will become less sexual when there's female tears.
Lowers testosterone? It does something to the hormones specifically.
I don't know what the details are.
Yeah.
And then there's another set of studies that says females become more sympathetic to males if there's tears.
Yeah.
And then there's some that are saying, in fact, that there's different chemical compositions, female and male, and with different effects, and this is still all fairly preliminary and being worked out.
Yeah, this is new too.
Yeah. We're watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was curious about the shiver and shaking aspects, and wondered if I went to a self-care conference one day where we all shook it off, you know. It was before Taylor Swift and her song, but we did shake, and the idea was this kind of biological factor of, like, if you watch animals in the wild after they've been attacked, they get up, they shake, and they sort of run off, and there's this idea of literally shaking off the trauma. And it sounds like when you were talking,
I think a guy named Peter Levine has focused on that.
Yes, right. Fight, flight, or freeze stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, so from your perspective, can that actually bring about the resolution? Could you sort of intentionally shake it off to bring about the resolution?
I'm going to say no. Not that I know for sure, but it does seem like it puts the reaction before the stimulus. And since it's the stimulus that's important, I don't know that the reaction can create the stimulus. If I were making the counter case, I would say, well, it may be a circular process so that it's not just a simple one-time deal, and maybe you get it started by doing the shaking artificially, and then it becomes something more than that. do know there was a time when I was a counselor at a summer camp when I decided it would be a good thing to be angry, but I wasn't angry. So I looked for a chair that I could throw, and I deliberately and threw the chair to get everybody's attention and to signify that I was angry. And I started yelling at the group about this and that. I'm not claiming this was good counselor technique. And before I knew it, I was really angry.
It's William James, act how you want to feel.
And there are some studies that say if you put your face in the configuration of a particular emotion, you at least make it more likely that you will have that emotion. Now that makes sense because the emotion is in fact a set of configurations, including skeletal ones. So you are getting into character, so to speak.
Does the reaction match? So I'm thinking of clients who sometimes actually have that the shift, but they don't cry, they laugh.
Yeah.
And sometimes we evaluate what that their reaction was or wasn't appropriate. Well, this is a moment of crying, and you're laughing. But
this is totally a mistake to impugn and judge which reaction the system gives you.
Right.
I'll accept either one. They're both pluses.
Yeah.
I've purposely stayed away from the difference between laughter and crying. If you go to another room and you don't see the person, you will not sometimes be able to tell if they're laughing or crying, because the sound will be very similar. You'll have that. You won't be able to tell. So we know there's a similarity. We're not quite sure what the difference is. Seems to me most of the time, if you have to give up the position, let go or give up a position, and not go back to that position, it's more likely to be tears. But if you give up the position, but in the next minute can reclaim it, but in a slightly different way, as in the Fat Ethel joke, it's more apt to be laughter. This is my private hypothesis about it. I have no idea if that's right or not, and I haven't been able to find anybody else who seems to.
Probably there is in different cultures, so that laughter is more likely.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do think there's quite a bit of universality about these emotional settings across cultures. So my guess would be no.
There's I don't know how true it is, there's a story about Balinese people who, in a situation of anger, would tend to fall asleep.
To fall asleep? Boy, I would not have predicted that. If you find a source for that, would you send it to me in an email?
A story about problems with court cases in Bali. People
fall
asleep in court.
I was going to say, maybe I'll try that the next time. We've got about 3 minutes. Any last thoughts? Well, I thank you very much for attending this last day just before closing ceremony.